I was home alone at 12 years old, hiding in a closet, listening to someone walk around my bedroom, believing I was about to die. I was 12 years old, curled up in the dark, holding my breath so tightly my chest burned, while someone I didn't know stood inside my bedroom. I could hear the floorboards bend under their weight. I could hear fabric brushing against my desk. And in that moment, hiding in a space barely big enough for my body, I was completely convinced that if the door in front of me opened, I would die right there, without anyone ever knowing what happened to me. That is not a metaphor. That is not an exaggeration. That night actually happened. Before I go any further, if you're drawn to true stories like this, real experiences that sit somewhere between fear, survival, and the terrifying reality of being alone, consider subscribing to the channel. Every story shared here is real, and your support is what keeps these stories coming. I'm 26 now, but I remember that night with painful clarity. It happened during a time in my life when being home alone felt like freedom. My parents were going out for the evening, and they told me I'd be staying home with my older brother, Ethan. He was 18, old enough to drive, old enough to think rules were optional, and old enough to convince me that nothing bad could ever happen. The house we lived in was big for a family of 4. 2 floors, long hallways, a finished basement, and plenty of empty space that felt exciting during the day and unsettling at night. When my parents left, Ethan told me he was heading out to meet some friends. Just for a few hours, he said. He made me promise not to tell Mom or Dad. I agreed without hesitation. Part of me trusted him, and another part of me loved the idea of having the entire house to myself. At first, it felt like a reward. I grabbed snacks, turned on the TV in the den, and decided to watch a horror movie. Looking back, that decision still feels like the universe testing me. At 12 years old, I wanted to prove I wasn't a kid anymore. I wanted to handle being alone, even at night. About halfway through the movie, the excitement started to wear off, not because the film was particularly scary, but because the house itself seemed to wake up. The quiet became louder than the movie. The floor creaked in places I didn't remember. The wind pressed against the windows, making them shudder slightly in their frames. The refrigerator clicked on and off, each time sending a sharp jolt through my body. Every sudden sound from the TV made me flinch. My eyes kept drifting away from the screen toward the staircase behind the couch. It led up to the main floor, disappearing into darkness. I kept expecting to see someone standing there, even though I knew no one should be home. Eventually, I turned the TV off. I didn't even bother shutting it down properly. I just wanted silence, or maybe I wanted control. I ran upstairs to my bedroom, feeling ridiculous but unable to stop myself from moving quickly, like something might grab me if I didn't. In my room, I tried to calm down. I brushed my teeth in the bathroom that connected my room to my parents' bedroom, splashing cold water on my face, telling myself I was overreacting. After that, I sat on my bed and turned on my Xbox, losing myself in a game for a few hours. It worked, at least temporarily. Time slipped by unnoticed. Sometime later, after turning the console off and lying down, I felt it. A vibration, subtle but unmistakable. The front door closing. Relief washed over me. I assumed Ethan was back. I lay there, listening, expecting to hear him head upstairs like he always did. But instead, the sounds stayed downstairs. Soft footsteps, thumps that didn't follow a clear pattern. Drawers opening maybe, something shifting. Minutes passed and the noises didn't stop. A knot formed in my stomach. I got out of bed and crept to the window, carefully pushing the curtain aside. I looked down at the driveway where Ethan always parked. It was empty. That was the moment fear stopped being abstract. I didn't have a phone. I had no way to call my parents. The house phones were downstairs, and the thought of leaving my room felt impossible. I locked my bedroom door, fully aware that the cheap lock could be opened from the outside with nothing more than a fingernail. I scanned my room, my mind racing. There was only one place I could hide, a small crawl-in closet built into the wall, barely big enough for storage, let alone a person. I squeezed inside, pulling the door shut as quietly as I could. My knees pressed against my chest. The air was stale and tight. I forced myself to slow my breathing, listening. Then I heard footsteps coming down the hall. They stopped right outside my door. The handle moved. The door opened. Someone stepped into my room. I watched shadows shift through the crack of the closet door. I heard my floor creak beneath their weight. Something scraped across the carpet. At one point, they dragged an object from one side of the room to the other. I had no idea what they were doing, only that they were close enough to kill me if they found me. I prayed it was my brother. I prayed I was wrong, but every instinct in my body told me otherwise. Time lost all meaning. My legs went numb. My throat ached from holding back sobs. I was sure the door would open at any second. Eventually, the footsteps moved away. I stayed there, frozen, long after the house went quiet. Nearly 2 hours passed before I heard Ethan's voice calling my name. When I finally stepped out, shaking uncontrollably, his confusion turned into horror as he realized what had happened. The house had been ransacked. Electronics were gone, drawers pulled out. Someone had walked freely through our home while I hid feet away from them. The police came. My parents came home furious and shaken. Ethan paid for his mistake in ways that followed him for years. But I learned something that night. Being alone isn't about bravery, it's about awareness. And sometimes survival comes down to listening to the quiet voice in your head telling you something is wrong, even when you don't want to believe it. That was only the first time being home alone nearly changed my life forever. The second time I learned how dangerous being home alone could be. I was much younger, too young to fully understand what was happening, but old enough to remember the fear in a way that never faded. At that point in my life, my parents had separated. I was living with my grandparents in a small, quiet town where everyone knew everyone else. It was the kind of place people described as safe without thinking twice about it. Doors were often left unlocked. Neighbors stopped by unannounced. Kids rode their bikes until the sun went down. No one worried. I almost never stayed home alone back then. My grandfather was usually around, and my uncle lived with us too. The house always felt full, always felt protected. That's why no one thought twice about leaving me alone for a short time one evening. My grandmother had gone out to bingo, something she did every week. I had called her earlier asking when she'd be home, and she said it wouldn't be long. My grandfather told me he was going to pick her up. He asked if I wanted to come with him. I didn't. I was sitting on the floor watching cartoons, completely absorbed, and I didn't want to miss the episode. Before he left, he crouched down in front of me and said the same thing he always said. "Don't answer the door for strangers." I nodded, barely listening. He gave me one last look, then walked out the door. The house went quiet almost immediately. Only a few minutes passed before there was a knock. It wasn't loud or aggressive, just a casual knock, like someone who expected to be let in. I jumped up and ran to the door without thinking. From the other side, a familiar voice called my name. It was a man who lived nearby. I'll call him Mark. He wasn't family, but he might as well have been. He came over often. He watched sports with my uncle. He helped my grandfather fix the truck. I had seen him laughing at our table more times than I could count. I asked who it was, even though I already knew. He said his name and told me he'd just seen my grandfather leave. He said he needed to come inside. I told him my grandparents weren't home. He said he knew. I told him my uncle wasn't home either. He said he'd just spoken to him on the phone and knew exactly where he was. Then he said something that confused me. He said he wasn't a stranger. In my child's mind, that mattered. I'd been told not to open the door for strangers, but Mark wasn't a stranger. He was someone everyone trusted, someone I trusted. I unlocked the door. The moment he stepped inside, I noticed something was wrong. He was much taller than I remembered, or maybe I was just smaller than I realized. He smelled strongly of alcohol. He swayed slightly as he stood there, his eyes unfocused, his words slurred just enough to notice. He put his hands on my shoulders as I backed away, closing the door behind him. I didn't feel scared yet. I'd seen my uncle drunk plenty of times. Adults acted weird sometimes. That was normal. I told him he could wait in the kitchen. I told him I was going back to watch TV. He didn't let go. I tried to pull away, laughing nervously, but his grip tightened. His voice changed. The friendliness drained out of it, replaced by something sharp and angry. I don't remember exactly what he said. I only remember the way my stomach dropped and how my chest felt tight, like I couldn't get a full breath. He dragged me into the kitchen. That's when I saw the knife. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a large kitchen knife, the kind my grandmother used for cutting meat. He pressed the tip lightly against my stomach and asked me if I wanted to be stabbed. When I started crying, he told me to be quiet. He said if I didn't, he'd cut my throat. He dragged the dull edge of the blade across my neck, slow and deliberate, like he wanted me to understand how easily he could hurt me. I stopped making noise. Time felt strange then. Everything slowed down, but my thoughts raced. I didn't know why this was happening. I didn't know what I had done wrong. I only knew that the person everyone trusted had turned into someone I didn't recognize. Then I heard a sound that felt unreal, a car door closing outside. For a split second, relief washed over me so fast it almost made me dizzy. I tried to scream, tried to call out, but his hand clamped over my mouth. He turned us both toward the doorway just as my grandmother walked in. Her face changed instantly. One second she was smiling, the next she was screaming for my grandfather. Her voice was pure panic. My grandfather came running inside, his expression shifting from confusion to rage the moment he saw what was happening. He didn't hesitate. He charged forward, yelling, demanding to know what Mark thought he was doing. Mark shoved me hard, sending me to the floor. My grandmother rushed to me, pulling me into her arms, blocking my view as she told me over and over that I was safe. I could hear shouting, I could hear furniture moving, I could hear the sounds of a struggle. Then suddenly, it stopped. When I looked up, my grandfather was forcing Mark toward the door, screaming at him to never come back. He slammed the door behind him so hard the walls shook. No one called the police. At the time, I didn't question that. I was just a kid. I was wrapped in blankets being told everything was okay. But as I got older, that night started to feel heavier. Mark disappeared after that. I never saw him again. No one talked about him. Years later, after my grandfather passed away, I brought it up to my grandmother. She looked uncomfortable. She said it was a terrifying night and changed the subject quickly. That's when I realized something. My grandfather had gone hunting that same night, late, alone, something he rarely did. In a town that trusted him completely, no one would have questioned him leaving with a tarp in the back of his truck. I don't know what really happened after Mark left our house. I don't know where he went or why no one ever spoke of him again. All I know is that the sense of safety I had as a child vanished that night. Because sometimes the scariest thing about being home alone isn't a stranger breaking in. It's realizing the danger already knows your name, your family, and exactly when no one else will be there. The third time being home alone nearly turned into something irreversible. I was old enough to understand danger, but still young enough to underestimate it. I was 15, home by myself during spring break. My parents were out of town for the night, and I had the house to myself. By then, being alone didn't scare me the way it once had. After everything I'd already lived through, I thought I had a decent sense of awareness. I locked the doors. I kept the lights on. I trusted my instincts. What I didn't account for was the danger of letting the wrong person inside. It started with a phone call. I was in my room, half paying attention to a video on my phone, when I saw the name pop up on the screen. I'll call him Ryan. We weren't close. We were friendly at school, nothing more. We rarely talked outside of that. So seeing his name calling me late at night felt strange, but not alarming enough to ignore. I answered. Before I could say hello, he asked what I was doing. I told him I was just at home, alone, not up to much. There was a pause on the line, followed by a question that immediately made me uncomfortable. He asked if he could drop someone off at my house for the night. He said it casually, like it was no big deal. The person he wanted to drop off was another guy I'd known since elementary school. I'll call him Lucas. We'd grown up together, played sports together. He wasn't someone I considered dangerous, just different, loud, unfiltered, always saying whatever came to his mind. I told Ryan no. I said I didn't want company and just wanted to be by myself. He didn't accept that answer. His voice changed. He started pleading, telling me it was important, telling me Lucas had nowhere else to go. Then he said something that should have ended the conversation right there. He offered to bribe me. He said if I let Lucas stay, I could use his vape pen. At 15, alone and trying to seem older than I was, that stupid offer worked. I told myself it was harmless. It was just one night. It was someone I'd known forever. That was my mistake. When they arrived, I met them at the front door. Ryan handed me the vape, just like he promised. As he was leaving, he suddenly grabbed Lucas by the shoulders. His eyes filled with tears. His voice shook as he begged him not to do that thing. I remember standing there, confused, watching this strange exchange unfold in my doorway. Lucas stared back at him blankly and said he understood, in a tone that felt rehearsed. Ryan looked at me like he wanted to say something else, then turned and walked away. I should have asked questions. Instead, I closed the door and let Lucas inside. The first thing he asked me wasn't about food or the bathroom or where he'd sleep. He asked if all the doors were locked. Every alarm in my head went off at once. I asked why. He told me to check. I hesitated, then walked him down the narrow hallway by the front door, showing him that the back door and the laundry room door were locked. He stared at them silently, nodding to himself. We stood there in silence for a few seconds too long. Then, without warning, he slowly raised his hand in the air, like a student asking to speak. A wide, unsettling smile spread across his face. He held that pose, staring at me, eyes unblinking. I forced a laugh, a fake, nervous sound meant to break the tension. He dropped his arm like nothing had happened and asked for water. In the kitchen, I grabbed bottles from the fridge. As I turned back around, I noticed he wasn't near the counter. He was standing by the silverware drawer, the one with the knives. He opened it slowly, his fingers hovering over a steak knife. I didn't think. I reacted. I rushed forward, grabbed his wrist, slammed the drawer shut, and stepped back. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he chuckled, quietly, like it was all a joke. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I felt the kind of fear people talk about later, the kind that hits you when your body knows something your mind doesn't want to accept. This wasn't awkward. This wasn't weird. This was dangerous. I knew I had to get him out of the house without setting him off. He broke the silence by suggesting we go to the park nearby. I agreed immediately, acting normal, forcing my voice to stay calm. We walked toward the laundry room exit, and I made sure he went out first. I told him I needed to put my shoes on. The moment he stepped outside, I slammed the door and locked it. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my phone as I called my older brother. I told him everything, barely able to get the words out. When I hung up, I did something that still feels surreal to think about. I gathered every knife in the kitchen and carried them upstairs to my room. I wasn't thinking clearly. I was scared and I was impaired, but I knew one thing. I couldn't let Lucas get back inside. Less than 5 minutes later, my brother arrived with 3 friends. They confronted Lucas outside. I watched from inside as Lucas rambled incoherently, talking about secret organizations, coaches trying to harm students, and people plotting against him. None of it made sense. Eventually, they got him into a car and took him home, even though he insisted his own father was trying to kill him. Later that night, I called Ryan and demanded to know what he hadn't told me. That's when the truth came out. During the drive to my house, Lucas had been reading from a manifesto. He believed he needed to kill himself or someone else to prevent his father from murdering him. Ryan had panicked. He didn't know what to do, so he dumped him at my house, without warning me, without protecting me. A month later, I learned Lucas had taken drugs that triggered severe schizophrenic episodes. He was hearing voices. He genuinely believed he was in danger, but knowing that didn't make what happened any less terrifying. That night taught me something brutal and important. Being home alone doesn't just mean watching for strangers. Sometimes the real danger walks in smiling, carrying years of familiarity with it. And sometimes survival depends on recognizing the moment when being polite could get you killed. The fourth and final time being home alone shattered my sense of safety. I was 10 years old. And unlike the other nights, this one didn't start with darkness or silence or a bad decision. It started on a bright, ordinary afternoon, the kind of day where nothing bad is supposed to happen. My mom was heading out to the grocery store. She asked if I wanted to come with her. I didn't. I remember making a big deal out of it, insisting I was old enough to stay home by myself for a couple of hours. The weather was perfect, warm, sunny, the kind of day that made the whole neighborhood feel alive. I just wanted to stay outside and shoot hoops in the street. She hesitated, then finally gave in. She reminded me to lock the doors and not let anyone inside. I promised her nothing would happen. I watched her car pull out of the driveway, then ran to the garage, grabbed the old basketball and started playing. For a while, everything felt normal. I dribbled up and down the street, pretending I was in the final seconds of a game, counting down imaginary clocks, celebrating fake victories. I was sweating, breathing hard, completely lost in my own world. At one point, I stopped to catch my breath. I bounced the ball lazily and looked around the quiet neighborhood. That's when I looked up at the house. At the upstairs window, my sister's bedroom, I saw someone standing there. At first, it was just a shape. A dark figure behind half-open blinds, standing still, slightly back from the glass. I told myself it was a trick of the light, a shadow. Maybe the blinds moving. Then the shape shifted. Someone was watching me. My heart dropped so suddenly it felt like the air had been punched out of my lungs. No one was supposed to be home. My sister was away at college. My dad was at work. My mom was across town. I stared for a second too long, hoping the figure would disappear. It didn't. I dropped the basketball and ran. I sprinted around the side of the house, through the backyard gate, and burst inside, slamming the door behind me. I yelled up the stairs, asking who was home. My voice cracked as I said it. For a moment, there was no response. Then a voice answered. It said my name. "Come upstairs." It wasn't my mom. It wasn't my dad. It wasn't my sister. The voice was deeper than any of theirs, but not exaggerated. It sounded calm, controlled, like someone trying very hard to sound normal. I didn't go anywhere near the stairs. I ran straight through the house, grabbed the cordless phone from the kitchen counter, and bolted back outside. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it as I called my mom. When she answered, I told her someone was in the house. At first, she didn't believe me. She told me not to joke about things like that. She said she was almost done shopping. I started crying, not quietly, not politely. I was sobbing, begging her to come home, telling her someone had called my name from inside the house. That's when her tone changed. She told me to stay outside. She said she was leaving the store immediately. After she hung up, a police car pulled up. Almost at the same time, my mom's car turned into the driveway. She jumped out, panic written all over her face, and asked me where I'd seen the person. I pointed to the upstairs window. The officers went in first. My mom followed them inside after a moment. I stayed outside, staring at that same window, convinced I'd see the figure again. They didn't find anyone. They searched every room, closets, under beds, behind furniture, even the attic. When they came back out, they told us the house was clear. After they left, my mom hugged me tightly, but something had changed. I could feel it. She said she believed me, but her voice didn't. That night, I struggled to fall asleep. Every sound felt louder. Every shadow felt wrong. Eventually, exhaustion took over. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when something woke me. It was a sound, soft but close. I sat up in bed, my eyes adjusting to the darkness. I could make out the shapes of my room, my dresser, my closet door slightly open, and then I saw something else, a tall, dark shape standing near my bed. For a split second, my mind tried to explain it away. A dream, a trick of the dark, then it moved. That's when I screamed. The figure reacted instantly. It rushed across my room in 2 long steps, slid my window open and jumped out. I heard the thud of feet landing on the small awning below, then nothing. My parents burst into my room. My dad ran straight to the window and then out the back door, barefoot, chasing someone he never caught. The police came again. They took another report. They searched the area. They found nothing. We never found out who he was. All I know is this: he was in the house long enough to know my name. He watched me from upstairs, and he stood in my room while I slept. That's the part that never leaves you. Not knowing how long he was there, not knowing what else he did, not knowing how close I came to something far worse. Being home alone isn't always scary in the moment. Sometimes the fear comes later, when you realize your home was never as safe as you thought, and someone else knew it before you did. When people hear these stories, they usually ask the same question: how did you not lose your mind? The truth is, I think a part of me did. Not in a loud or dramatic way, but quietly, over time. Each of those moments rewired how I see the world. They taught me that fear doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it knocks politely. Sometimes it sounds familiar. Sometimes it waits patiently in a place you thought was safe. For a long time, I blamed myself. I replayed every decision, every moment where I could have done something differently. I told myself I should have been braver, smarter, faster. But as I got older, I realized something important. I survived not because I was fearless, but because I listened. I paid attention. I trusted the small voice that said something wasn't right, even when it didn't make sense yet. That voice saved me. We like to believe danger looks obvious, that it wears a mask, that it kicks in doors and announces its intentions. But the truth is far more unsettling. Real danger blends in. It borrows trust. It waits for silence, for isolation, for moments when no one else is watching. And yet, here's the part that matters most. I'm still here. Those nights didn't define me by what almost happened. They defined me by what didn't, by the choices made in seconds, by the instinct to hide, to run, to lock a door, to speak up, to scream when it mattered most. Survival isn't always heroic. Sometimes it's small, shaking, and barely holding together, and that still counts. If there's one reason I share these stories, it isn't to scare you. It's to remind you that awareness is power, that listening to your instincts isn't weakness, it's wisdom, and that even in the moments where you feel small, alone, or unprotected, your mind and body are capable of more than you realize. So if you're watching this late at night, home alone, maybe feeling that quiet unease settle in, trust it, lock the door, turn on the light, call someone. Don't ignore that feeling just because you can't explain it. Fear kept me alive, and maybe one day it'll keep you alive too.